Steph Curry has become the first active player to have a dedicated solo exhibit at the Naismith Hall of Fame. And we're just talking about why. Why Steph Curry? And I made a quick list. Because you were in the chat and you used a word that's, I think, key in this. Inspiring.
Yeah.
Inspiring.
Because we're talking about, before in the first segment, who's had more of an impact. And I think, to me, it's, a lot of people, when they grow up and watch athletes, they feel an inspiration to either, copy them or to stand for them or to go out and watch them play. I do think there's a lot of inspiration that Steph has brought on this generation of kids and basketball players in a way that I haven't seen LeBron do.
So when you say impact,
yeah,
can you be more specific? Because here's what I would say. Okay, Michael Jordan, did he really impact the game of basketball? Well, he made it more popular. He was obviously iconic. Did the game itself change because of Jordan?
Well, there's a legal offense, right? Before Jordan, you could put him on one side of the court and ISO him with four players on the other. You can't do that anymore, right?
I mean, yeah.
That's literally a rule that was changed.
Was it? Because of Jordan?
I mean, it's the same thing.
Well, I would just argue Jordan didn't change the game like Curry changed the game.
No. I mean, the amount of three-pointers that are taken now compared to when he came into the league is drastically different.
So, here's what I'm getting at. So, I was telling Austin this in the chat. Okay, Larry Bird burst on the scene in 78, 79, essentially, his senior year in college. And, you remember, you ever hear that story that Nolan Richardson told about when he was listening to a game on the radio?
Yeah.
And he kept hearing Bird, Bird, Bird. Nobody even knew who he was. Nobody knew what he looked like. And then Nolan Richardson found out he was white and was just like, "Why? I don't get it." And then he watched him play and said, "Okay, I get it." And then Bird started playing and started going on a national TV. They had a lot of Indiana State games on his senior year, and he played in a way that gave some hope to white players. It's really that simple. Now, I get it. He was 6'9". He wasn't 6'3" like Steph Curry, but Bird came into the league, and yes, there were great white players before him, like Jerry West, et cetera. But there's just no doubt, when I saw Larry Bird play, I was like, oh my God. Like, that's the way you got to do it to be really good if you have physical limitations. And I think Bird did give hope to a lot of white kids, slower white kids probably, who didn't have a lot of, natural athletic ability. And he kind of showed everybody there was a way to do it without having to have that ability and still be a great player. And I think, in my little, I'll say it again, itty bitty, teeny tiny world, yeah, Bird was definitely the player to me that inspired me way more than any other player, and it's not even close.
Yeah, and for you, it was the color of his skin, but there wasn't
part of it for sure.
Well, but there wasn't anything like anatomically that related you to him. I mean, he's 6'9",
right,
6'10". So what he was doing was, and that's why I think that a lot of people looked at Jordan. It's like, yeah, I'm not 6'6" or 6'7". I can't fly. But that's where I do think that Jordan inspired a lot of people with just almost like this mythical ability to do things that people hadn't seen before at that level.
Right.
Steph is different because he's relatable, but it's not as if everyone is walking to the park and saying, well, I'm gonna shoot like Steph today. I think it's easier to do than jump, 7 feet in the air.
Right.
But similar to what you're talking about, like you were never going to be Larry Bird, but that didn't prevent you from thinking you could be.
Right. Well, I mean, here's what I remember as a kid. If you wanted to emulate Jordan, you know what we used to do? We used to play on a 9-foot rim. Like, that's what we used to do to emulate Jordan. We'd go to a 9-foot rim where we could dunk. and we would dunk. But you could emulate Bird on a 10-foot basket. You know what I mean? So like that was something to me that was very real. But like, okay, let me just throw some names at you, because if we're going to talk about impact on the game of basketball, I got some names that I'll just throw at you, or impacts in the game of basketball that influenced a certain segment of fans. All right, I'll mention a guy that you've heard of, obviously, but would never make this list, but I think he's as important as anybody else. Okay. Šarūnas Marčiulionis. He was the first guy to come over from Lithuania, and he played for the Golden State Warriors. And that move was the impetus toward, like, it wasn't the point A to B, but it was the impetus that allowed a lot of European players and Eastern European players to begin to break through into the NBA. What do you think about that? What do you think about this guy? Jeremy Lin.
Absolutely.
Jeremy Lin.
Absolutely.
Like,
his impact on international involvement is crazy.
It was unbelievable. Like, he inspired an incredible generation of young players. But Curry to me is on a level, like, I think Jordan brought in an influence outside the game with the shoes, obviously, and the marketing. But in terms of on the court, I don't think there's anybody who's drawn more young kids into the game than Steph Curry.
Well, that's why if we're talking about basketball, the comparison between he and LeBron to me is a moot point. You know, I think LeBron, his influence was more on players. His impact was on player empowerment. And not that players didn't have sway in the league before LeBron got there, but, I mean, we're seeing it right now. People are waiting on what LeBron James is going to do. How many off seasons? I'll ask you this. I'm not pretending to be a know-it-all. Like, how many off seasons or summers when you were covering the league was there a player that could make the NBA schedule stop and kind of bend to his whim?
No. That's
LeBron.
No.
I mean, and he's done it multiple times. So, you know, that's where I would argue that he's had impact. You know, he's allowed guys to make unbelievable amounts of money. His contract with Nike, there's been nothing like it. You know, maybe Jordan before him, but I think his influence is off the court. If we're just talking about Curry, like, I want to look this up right now, because this is where you can see statistical evidence that Curry has changed the way that basketball is played in the NBA more than anybody since, I don't know, maybe more than Jordan. When he came into the league in 2009, teams were taking 18 three-pointers a game. Nowadays, in 2025-26, they took 37. That's more than double the amount of three-point shots from the time that Steph was a rookie. That's Curry. And it is the Warriors to some extent, but that's Curry. I'm sorry, because he made that shot such an efficient weapon that it mathematically changed the way basketball is played. Another way, the average length of shot. When he came into the league, the average length of shot was about 13 feet. In 2026, this last season, it was nearly 2 feet longer. So players are stretching out what they believe to be possible in terms of how far that they could shoot the basketball. That, to me, is Steph Curry. So if you want to talk about impact, the way the game is played, I think you're right, and that's why he's got this Hall of Fame exhibit, because it's not close. There's nobody that's bent the game like him in decades.
Yeah. This is from the 669. I think we can help you a little bit here. I don't fully understand how LeBron's decision forces the NBA to wait on the schedule. Could you touch on that? Well, yeah, I mean, whoever LeBron plays for is going to be playing on Christmas Day, for example. And whoever LeBron is playing for, they're going to want to put on opening night, most likely. And so they've got to figure out whether the team that they're going to broadcast 25 times a year nationally is going to be the Warriors. Is it going to be the Heat? Is it going to be Cleveland? You know, is it going to be a wild card team? That's definitely one of the reasons that they got to hold up the schedule, is because, you know, I mean, imagine if Curry were a free agent and nobody knew where he was going to play this upcoming year. You'd have to wait. You'd have to wait And if Steph Curry is signing with his Charlotte Hornets, guess what? The Hornets are going to be on 23 times next year on national television.
Yeah, I mean, like the Warriors are going to be on national TV no matter what next season, but they might get 10 more national games
right,
if LeBron and Curry are playing together.
Yeah, I mean, here's one thing. I don't know if I ever told you this story. It's not earth-shattering or anything, but I remember when the Hawks had drafted Trae Young, and it was his first year in Atlanta, and he was working out, and he was shooting threes, and he was taking his threes at the three-point line. And Atlanta basically was like, you know what? Why don't you step out a few more feet? Like, they didn't want him shooting whatever the line was, 23-9. They wanted him out at 25-5. They wanted him to be a threat from out there. And that's what Curry's done. When he came into the league, if a guy was standing outside the three-point line, you probably just were a step off him and were saying to yourself, if he shoots, I'll just contest. You can't just contest. Like, you have to defend out there. And so teams started taking away the shot right at the three-point line. Well, that doesn't matter to Curry. He'll go out 4 more feet and get his wide-open shot. So, I mean, the one thing Curry has done is he's not only been the greatest three-point shooter of all time. Let's say that's 24 feet, but he's also the greatest shooter from 26 feet or 28 feet. And, like, that's where he's really, truly changed the game in terms of the spacing and the impact that he's had on teammates by the mere fact that, like I always said, Evan, if Steph Curry had one leg, you could still put him at the hash mark and he would still have to be guarded. And then everybody else can play 4-on-4, and it's easier to score the fewer guys you have on the court. So, like, that's another impact he had, not just the three-point shooting, but, like, shooting beyond the three-point line into these areas of the court that were never shot from before.
Well, and that's what I remember reading. I think it was Marcus Thompson who wrote Steph's first book. I think it's called Golden, but there was a story about how, because he really didn't start taking ridiculously long threes until the unanimous MVP season in 2016. And he took some, in years prior, but basically they sat down the summer before, and he's trying to figure out obviously how to get better, even on an MVP season. And one of the things that the analytics department presented him with was, hey, here's what you shoot from, like you mentioned, 23-9.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you shoot from 25. Here's what you shoot from 28. And what they realized is that his percentage was pretty much the same. There wasn't a big drop-off. And I think that, like, that was there was always just this assumption that the further you are away from the basket, the less effective you are.
No doubt.
And that didn't apply to Curry. And so that first game against New Orleans in 2016, he took a lot of deep, really deep threes. And I just looked at the game. He scored 40 points, made 5 threes. 3 of them were from 28 or beyond. And that was the moment where he realized, like, oh, I can do this. Because at that time, you see it now. Remember the back-to-back games earlier this season, back in November, when they beat San Antonio on 2 straight nights?
Yep.
Like, Wemby is out 28 feet to try and make sure that Steph is not going to take that shot. That didn't happen until 2016, because teams, again, are just giving those guys that shot. That did not apply to Steph Curry. And there's a lot of players that it applies to now. You see how far teams will trap, not just Steph, but particular players who are deep three-point shooters beyond the three-point line. Playing that kind of defense and allowing an offense to create a 4-on-3 advantage, at least to my knowledge, it didn't really exist before he began to do that. No,
I mean, he's done things that have kind of, to my way of thinking, turned the game on its ear. And one of the things he's done, which I don't know that any player has ever done it before, but he's the only player. Would this be an accurate statement? Steph Curry's the only player who becomes more dangerous the further away he is from the basket.
Yes.
And that is absolutely preposterous if, you've been watching basketball for 50 or 60 years, because it just was unheard of that you might have to pick up a guy over the half-court line, not to pressure him, not to try to turn him over, not even to get the ball out of his hands, but you have to guard him over the half-court line because he can score 3 points when he gets over the line. Like, there has never been a player who has been paid more attention to 30 feet from the basket in the history of the game. And I don't know that there ever will be unless there's a guy who comes along that can shoot it like him in the future. And while it's hard to believe there probably will be at some point. But, the other thing is there's just nobody, when they put the line in, the 3-point line back in 79 or 80, nobody in their wildest imagination ever thought in a million years that a guy could shoot it as well as Steph Curry in a game situation, under duress and with defense played on him. It's just like it was unfathomable. And so now here we are 40, 50 years later, and he has made a shot that wasn't even attempted back 30 or 40 years ago into what's become like mainstream NBA. Like if you can't shoot the three, you can't play in the NBA. I mean, you can, but you know what I mean. If you can't make threes, you are not reaching your potential as a player in the NBA, whether you're 6 feet or 7 feet.
Yeah, it's because of the amount of space that I think the 3-point shot creates, or the threat of it, right? Because one of the reasons why Draymond was the perfect player for the Warriors at the time is because once Steph draws attention, Draymond back in 10, 12 years ago, to some extent during the last championship they had, he's the perfect decision maker at that spot on the floor with what to do with the ball. The Curry had a lot of hockey assists because Draymond would then identify where the ball needed to go after Curry drew 2 guys. And the thing about it, too, is, Tiny, is like he is such a prolific 3-point shooter that people will associate that with him regardless of the rest of his skill set. I mean, he's a great basketball player. He does a lot of other things well, specifically in the offensive end, besides shoot the 3-pointer. But he is the most effective shooter I've ever seen. And it's not just from 30 feet. It's from 28. It's from 25. It's from 19. Lefty floaters, using the glass, the free throw line. Like, there are, in every way, shape, and form, when it comes to putting the ball in the hoop without dunking it, there's never been a player more dangerous than Steph. And I think that's why he connects with so many people, is because people are not saying that they can shoot as well as Steph Curry. And people are not saying that I can, be this small guy to make every single shot. But again, it's just the inspiration of someone that he makes the impossible seems possible. And I think that's why, maybe I related to your Bird story, where you're not dumb enough to think you can be him,
right?
But he inspires you in a way that makes you feel like you can.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's a funny one, but it's kind of along the same lines. A little bit of a stretch, but San Jose Jazz fans saying Darryl Dawkins.
Oh, Chocolate Thunder?
So he shattered a couple backboards, and they eventually came up with the breakaway rim.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's kind of true. I mean, we could go to all the things that Will Chamberlain did where they had to change the rules. I don't think anybody impacted the game like Will Chamberlain.
Well, I mean, some of the early guys, it's not really fair, right?
Right.
George Mikan changed the game maybe more than anybody else, because he could literally goaltend a shot.
Yeah. But like for example, Wilt Chamberlain back in the day, if a ball went out of bounds underneath the basket, you would actually inbound underneath the basket. You wouldn't be pushed to the side of either of the sides of the lane. And so back then, they would just throw it over the backboard, and Wilt would just be bigger than everybody and catch it. So they changed that rule. They changed the size of the lane because of Wilt Chamberlain. So, there have been a lot of guys that have influenced the game. Here's a guy I want to throw out there. We're talking about The reason we're talking about this is Steph Curry has become the first active player to have a dedicated solo exhibit at the Naismith Hall of Fame. In other words, they have those, but they're always for players who have retired.
Yeah, Ken was telling us that you had to be retired for at least 2 years before getting an exhibit.
So they've decided to put an active player exhibit at the hall, and it's going to be Steph Curry. And we were just batting around some reasons why it's Curry and maybe not LeBron. And I actually think one of the reasons may be, because LeBron doesn't have a team right now. Steph's played for the Warriors for 16 or 18, whatever it's been. And, it's kind of almost easier to do one of Steph right now than LeBron. But we're talking about, the guys who changed the game and the guys who inspired generations. What about this guy who I've heard his name come up? Where does this guy fit in? Allen Iverson.
He was someone I thought of also. Okay. When I was talking about LeBron being an influence off the court, Allen Iverson, absolutely. Like, when I was a kid growing up, my friends wanted to be like Allen Iverson because he was cool.
Right.
It was the hip-hop generation, the way that he dressed, how he wore his hair. And also then backing it up by how hard he played. It wasn't like, I think that's what kind of gets lost sometimes when I remember a lot of people thought that AI was just kind of a pretty boy and didn't try. But if you watched him play, there's no way you could possibly think that because he played 43 minutes a night and was on the floor, it felt like half the time with just how willing he was to take damage. So I think, Allen Iverson absolutely fits in that sort of influence.
Yeah, and so obviously Iverson culturally was very impactful off the court too. But like as far as being as a player, like Iverson brought like a toughness and a fearlessness. He played with a toughness and a fearlessness that I do think inspired a lot of players to play really hard, and to go to the basket and try to finish and finish through contact. Like I think he and Isaiah Thomas before him were the guys that played that way. But on the other hand, Allen Iverson also ushered in an era of it's all about the games. It's not about practice. You know what I mean? He just wanted to play games.
I thought you were going somewhere else because to me it's a little bit like Kobe too. It's all about me.
Right.
It's all about my game. I'm getting shots up. I'm scoring all the points. When the ball is rolled out, Allen Iverson or Kobe, like that to me I think is the biggest difference between like that generation and maybe Steph's is that like Steph does take a lot of shots, but it never feels like it's all about him. And I think that's because he's a threat on and off the ball. Whereas the Kobes, the AIs, those were guards that were very much ball dominant. And the show had to be about them. It couldn't be about anybody else.